Morning, everyone. Thanks. So I'm Tom, founder and CEO at Pinpoint. For context, because I know very few of you actually seem to have heard of us, we've been around about 7 years. There's about 70 of us. We're over in Stanmore and would love to chat to you. We're an ATS, about 750 customers in about 60 countries, but mainly here in the UK and in the US. We process millions of candidates, and I'm a massive nerd. And I think what I'm super interested in is leveraging that data and taking all the stuff that we learn through the recruitment and the customers that we have and sort of sharing it with you, whether you're a customer or not, and hopefully trying to kind of elevate TA into more of a strategic role. I think one of the reasons that I was keen to start the business a long time ago is I think there's a lot of stuff in talent that's really, really important, but there's a missed opportunity because leadership don't take it seriously enough, and leadership define a strategy and push it down to talent rather than kind of letting us be part of that conversation. And so big part of the focus for us is kind of how can we bring the TA function up to the top of the table. I think, without being mean, I think most of the people we speak to don't do reporting well, and I don't think what we're trying to say is that you can't do reporting or that you don't know how reporting works. I think we often see that you don't have the tools you need, you don't have the buy-in from leadership, you don't have the infrastructure, and often you don't have the benchmarking data to really understand whether what you're doing is performant relative to the market and things like that. We try and make these conversations as personalized and relevant as possible, and so we try to send out quite a lot of surveys. We do a lot of stuff on LinkedIn. We work with the RO100. We survey our customers, and we've had hundreds of responses to a lot of kind of generic surveys about data reporting and things like that. 39% of the people that we speak to say you have good visibility over hiring, which means the vast majority of you don't feel like you do. And I think we'd obviously like to understand both how you can change that and how you can use that to kind of improve your strategy. And I think important to refer that it's not just about the data, right? We're going to spend a lot of time thinking about getting that foundational data stuff right, making sure we're all tracking the right things and making sure we're actually feeding that and translating that into stuff the rest of the business understands. But what actually matters is the kind of the whole bigger picture. What does your process look like? Are your people engaging with your systems? What's the benchmarking, etc., etc. This lovely picture of a black box. Why do we have this? This is how we frame this problem internally at Pinpoint, right? We call this the recruitment black box, and our view is that everybody we speak to has this problem in some way, right? What we mean by black box is you've essentially got a bunch of systems and processes and things, but it's hard to kind of often get under the hood of that, extract the information that you need, and actually infer good things from that and use it to kind of move that through the rest of the business. And so if we give you an example of what we mean, maybe your team is kind of siloed. I think we speak to a lot of talent folk that don't necessarily have access to the financials of the business or understand the bigger picture strategic impact of the work that they're doing. And my view is it's very, very, very difficult for you to be effective if that's true. I think maybe you don't have the ability to actually set targets, right? We see most talent teams being very reactive to stuff set from leadership rather than being part of that conversation. And obviously it seems like a sort of rose-tinted perspective, but my view is that's completely wrong. And I'll give you some examples of why we think that's the case in a bit. And we're just here to kind of help you diagnose this problem, right? What does your black box look like in your organization? And I think I'll say this throughout the conversation, but it's really hard to have a data conversation or a strategy conversation one-to-many, because I'm looking at all of you and I've spoken to some of you already, and you have very different problems in very different businesses. So the actual call to action is there's 10 of us here. We all have, apart from me, oddly, green polo shirts with Pinpoint logos on them. Come and talk to us, whether you're in market for an ATS or not, right? We actually just care about solving these problems, and we'd love to have one-to-one conversations with you about that over the course of the day. We've got great coffee, we've got other things going. Come and have a chat, because I'd love to understand what your problems are, and we've got benchmarking data and other things we think will be helpful in solving for them, right? But that's the focus of that. I think if we talk through some very generic, high-level things that kind of do make sense on a one-to-many basis, I think we'd say start with your tech stack, right? And ATS is a component part of that, but there's a lot in that environment, right? And what we want you to understand is what data do you actually have about the performance of your recruitment? Where is it stored? Who's accessing it? How are you distributing that across the business? If you're relying on your team logging into your ATS and spending 20 minutes in Workday getting a report out, unsurprisingly, that's not going to be effective. And so think about not just what you have, but where it's going and what you're doing with it. I know you already know this stuff, but the reason I mention that is because if you don't have the ability to do that, it's very hard to start benchmarking, and we're really leaning into this idea of benchmarking at the moment, and I'll kind of give some context to why, right? I think, again, lots of different industries, lots of different organizational sizes, lots of different geographies, even in the room amongst some people I recognize, and I think what's important to us is that you're comparing what you're doing and whether you're looking at standard metrics like time to hire and time to fill and cost per hire, etc., or more complex things, We want you to have some comparable data that you can look at and determine whether you're actually being effective or not. And I think a lot of people are making the mistake of looking at benchmarking data that is very old. I think if I spoke to all of you, a lot of you hopefully would agree that the market looks very different today than it did 12 months, 18 months, 24 months and beyond. But I still speak to a lot of people that are looking at like salary comps from 2016 or time to hire from 2017. And obviously that doesn't reflect what the market looks like today. And so we have this thing called Recruitment Trends Dashboard. It's online, it's free, whether you're a customer or not. We basically have taken all of the data we have from all of our customers and a whole bunch of other stuff that we have access to and try to present it in hopefully a very easily digestible way. And again, all of this stuff is available at the stand and online at trends.pinpointhq.com whenever you want. The point of this stuff is, and again, obviously it's anonymized, but the point of this stuff is hopefully it allows you to go in and actually check your performance today against what other people are seeing today. And I know that that sounds really boring and simple, but we think it's very powerful to have access to that data set. And so please go spend some time doing that. And I think what we've seen is, if you're in retail and your time to hire is 100 days, which sounds ludicrous, but actually did happen for a client of ours, you can look at this and see that that's ludicrous, right? And then we can work with you, or you can work with you. Even the portal will tell you how to go fix that. And we just want to make sure you're doing that. And I think one of the things that's really important in that context is often that leadership really value benchmarks. If you go to them and say you're struggling here because of X, or you're not being able to do this because of Y, or their hiring plans are unrealistic, being able to bring them up to the minute data and show them why what they're asking for doesn't really align with what the industry is seeing is very valuable. And so that's point one, right? Point two is, I think we need to spend more time understanding what a leadership team needs. And I think people make assumptions around that because they're asked certain things. And I think that's wrong. Obviously I'm biased. I'm embarrassingly not from talent acquisition historically. I've obviously spent a long time doing that now and I'm very proud to do so. But I'm a geeky, nerdy CEO software person. And so from my perspective, I spend half my time talking to leaders and I spend half my time talking to TA leaders and TA folks on the ground. And what they're asking for and what they're talking about and even how they're talking about it could not be more different. And I think we see it's like a big part of our job to try and close that gap, because otherwise that mismatch doesn't really breed efficiency, right? And so you need to spend more time understanding what they actually need. And the big advice there is can you dig under the hood and get a better sense of what the driving forces for the business are? Yeah, as I say, you often think you know what you want. And what I mean by that is if the CEO tells you that you need to make 50 hires, you think your job is to make 50 hires. Or if the CFO gives you a budget and says, go solve this problem, that's what you think you're being asked to do. I guess what we'd encourage you to do is kind of dig deeper and understand, well, why is 50 hires the answer to this problem? And actually, are there other alternative answers? Because you all have a great deal more context about what the labor market looks like today than often the people asking you to do these things and coming up with these answers. And we see this play out really negatively, right? Again, only 15% of the people that we ask these questions to think they actually have a big impact on the company's strategy, which to me is really broken. And again, I'm going to give you a load more examples of this in the real world in a second. But my personal argument, and I would hope you would all agree, is that the quality and caliber of your talent and your workforce has never been more tightly correlated with the underlying performance of the business, right? We all hopefully understand that's why you all do the jobs that you do. But it seems farcical to me that we could all agree that that's true and then you guys not have a big impact on the strategy of the overall business. And so, yeah, we want our mission to give you a seat at that table. Back to my lovely black box. I think, we just see this as a real problem. Either the problem is that you've not got the data, or the problem is you do have the data, but you can't actually leverage that to make a difference to the organization's strategy, right? And so we can contrast the stuff that recruiters care about, right? And it's all the standard bits and bobs: time to hire, time to fill, cost to hire. Some of you are getting creative and looking at candidate wait time and doing clever things around quality of hire. And we think those things are awesome as well. I guess the problem is senior leaders, they actually just don't know, right? The reality is, even if they think they know, they often don't. And I had an email actually this morning, hopefully from somebody in the room, basically saying exactly that, right? They were asking for us to put together a dashboard for their CEO because they felt like their CEO didn't understand what he or she wanted, and they want us to tell them what they actually need to know. And I think we need to kind of reposition the conversation where you're giving people what they need, not necessarily what they want. And I know it's really easy to say these things and much, much harder to do them. But even if the only reason you come to our stand is that I call your boss and tell them they suck, please do that, because it gives us an opportunity to kind of shift the narrative around the role that talent can play in their business. And often it only takes one or two goes at this, right? If you all as a function deliver strategic value to the business, and again, I will come to an example in a second, I promise. The one time you do that, your team will get it immediately and the whole narrative shifts. And we're just trying to kind of nudge that engagement. So lots of you will be familiar with this thing. It's this lovely competency graph. I think we argue that a lot of leadership is unconsciously incompetent, right? They don't know what they don't know. Sometimes they think they know, which is even more dangerous. I think we see the job of yourselves to a degree. And again, like some of you are on the ground just recruiting and you're busy and we get all of that. I think the difference to me between like real TA leadership and folks on the ground doing stuff is the ability for the leadership to take the rest of the business on this journey through unconscious competence, right? Conscious incompetence is at least them understanding that they have no idea what they need to know to kind of drive strategic value with people. Once they understand what they don't know, obviously the ambition is to get them to conscious competence, right? Which is like, actually you have the data that you need now to make decisions and actually shift the way you think about strategy within the company. And ultimately unconscious competence is just everything works automatically on autopilot. And that's kind of a halo state that we all strive to get to. And that's often a reflection of getting process right at the bottom right and putting great systems in place to make that happen automatically. I'm conscious I'm waffling and I'm going really quickly because there's a lot and it's quite dense, right? But I think like let's talk about some super generic things that we can do to make this stuff easier. And so first thing is like speak leadership's language. We spend a lot of time working with TA training organizations, TA leadership development, people across the industry. And we often ask them like, where are you going to learn? What are you learning? What are you focusing on? Where are their skills gaps? And what we've seen happen over the past, like, let's call it 3 or 4 years, is that narrative really shift from like, how do we react to deal with COVID and a changing labor force, to how do we recruit remotely, to how do we change in a very difficult economic climate. Now people are talking about how do I kind of get my data in order and how do I do better stuff? And we're seeing the composition of teams change and we're seeing a lot more people analytics and people ops and sort of those data-driven roles. And then it comes to how do I speak leadership's language? How do I get more commercial? And I think if you look at places like Purple or other kind of training platforms for the TA industry, a lot of their content is just commercial stuff, right? It's helping you understand the businesses you will work for so you can better reverse engineer the actual problem and start to add value. And so like you just need to spend some time, I think, learning to speak the way the C-suite speaks, that it's often quite different from the way we do. And again, lots of examples of how we can help you with that later. I think the big thing is tying your goals to leadership's goals. And what I mean here is rather than your goal being hire 50 people or 5,000 people for some of our larger clients or whatever it is that you think your underlying metric is, like what is that in support of? Like look one level further up. Is it that you're launching a new product or you're expanding into a new geography or you've got a new initiative to train rather than buy? Understand why, like understand how to roll up the thing you're doing to theirs. Because if you can do that, hopefully you all have the capacity to look at that and go, well, there's multiple ways of solving that problem. And if you could actually kind of proactively suggest those, you'll find that your job gets a lot more engaging, interesting, and often the business's performance is meaningfully better. And then again, we'd really encourage you to kind of speak up when stuff doesn't work. And again, I know this is difficult, but oftentimes people are in silos, and I'd say that the markets more broadly are more volatile than they've ever been. And so often people will set a goal at the beginning of the year, and 3 months into it, you can see the metrics mean you're never going to hit that target. And I think we want to make sure that you're armed with the benchmarking data and the other information that you need to make a case that that's not working and go proactively change that, right? If the sales team's goal is to have 3 new sales reps in seat by the end of the quarter and you're not going to do that, there's a big impact to the business on that. And you need to be able to kind of translate that message in a way that makes sense. I promised I'd get to some examples, and I think like this is where we kind of try and bring things to life. And so the whole point of all of the stuff I've already said is like, how does it enable you as a function to sort of think outside the box a little bit, right? And so an example we always use is like, so we work with a very large creative agency, sort of 2,500 people based all over the UK a couple of years ago. They won a big new contract with Unilever, right? And that contract required them to hire 100 people and expand into South America. Their leadership team went and sat in sort of their hypothetical ivory tower, and they said, well, where are we going to go in South America? And they looked at how much does it cost to travel from London to these different cities? There was 5 candidate cities in South America. What's the cost of office space? How nice are the hotels, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? What's the regulatory environment look like? And they made decisions and shortlisted the place they were going to go and expand to exclusively based on these kind of very high level metrics, right? What they didn't think about at all, which is, to be honest, quite embarrassing given their entire business is to hire people and resell them on projects, is where is the talent? And so they actually had a really strategic TA leader, and that TA leader took £50,000, which is a lot of money, but for them, all relevant, they split that budget into £5,000-10,000 chunks. And they spent that on advertising for various roles across those 5 different cities, £10,000 in each city. And what they got from the back of that was, what was the candidate volume? What was the candidate quality? What did the average scorecard look like? How easy is it to go and build an employer brand in that territory, etc.? And what they realized is that all of the talent they actually wanted was in a completely different city to the ones that they had shortlisted, because they're looking for the stuff that actually matters. And obviously, fortunately, in that situation, the business adapted the way it approached that expansion and was very effective in doing so. But it's just an example of how easy it is for leadership to kind of not think about the role talent plays in some of these bigger picture initiatives. And like, that's just criminal from my perspective. And we want to see kind of more of this sort of stuff. And we see our role as really helping support that. I think another example, one of our larger clients that we can talk about is Holland America Line. They're a cruise line. They hire huge volumes, right? So they're very seasonal. They hire all of the staff that work on cruise ships. They'll often hire 4,000 people in a quarter. Very, very significant volume. And they have global talent partners who are tasked with hiring hundreds of people per month each, right? So the volume is crazy, but the business is very large, and the knock-on impact of them doing their job well or not is humongous. And so one of the things that they've kind of done as part of this kind of broader strategic initiative is they've shifted to all-year recruiting, right? Previously, they used to recruit very seasonally. They've actually determined it to be much cheaper overall to recruit year-long and reposition and redeploy that talent than to do so crazily reactively at high cost. And like, they actually spent net more money to do this, but the impact on the rest of the business is lower. And you're only able to kind of win these battles if you're able to have that conversation horizontally across the whole business. I think they also shifted to persona-based hiring, right? Obviously, the talent profile for somebody who works on a cruise ship is maybe different from some of the folks that you recruit, but maybe it isn't. And they found that a shift to persona-based hiring rather than hiring on the metrics that they used to use really enabled them to recruit at volume much, much, much faster. And then they made sure that that data was coming out of the ATS. And I think, look, we build an ATS. We love ATS. We think it's really important. We want you to come log into it every day. But we also realize that most of your business, frankly, doesn't want to do that. And you need to make it really easy to get the data that you're generating in your systems and get them out into places where your end users actually care. And so like, they've done a really good job of pushing data from their hiring, including forecasting, out to other areas of the business. You imagine they're hiring 4,000 people in Alaska in a quarter. They need to provide accommodation for all of those people. And so it's really important that as they push people through hiring platforms and through processes, that's visible to the rest of the business so they can go and provide accommodation, do onboarding and all of the other stuff that matters, right? And so it's just really important. And I know like everything I've said for the past 20 minutes is extremely simple, but the problem is that it's still not happening at huge scale, right? And like, we want to see that transition accelerate a little bit more than it is at the moment. And so I'm going to stop waffling. I think some high level takeaways before we do questions and hopefully get the chance to speak to some of you individually a little bit later. One, foundations are important. We started with the data stuff. Hopefully a lot of you have really high quality reporting already, but if you don't move on to step 2 until you've got that right. Look at your processes, look at your black box, understand what you haven't got, and work out how you're going to get access to that stuff first. I think 2, we'll keep talking about it, but benchmarks could not be more important and relevant today. And again, the argument from my perspective is, as the volatility of our world changes, which it continues to do, relevancy of benchmarking data could not be more important, and keeping that fresh and like actually specific to you. Don't look at time to hire. Look at time to hire for retail businesses of 1,000 to 2,000 people, and like really narrow the data so that it can be relevant to you. Reporting's not just about data. Great that you've now got the data theoretically, but how are you translating that, getting it out into the hands of the people that matter in the business outside your function, and also speaking to them in a language that they understand. In order to actually get that seat at the table, you need to invest the time and energy personally to like understand the business that you're doing. So spend as much time learning the big picture commercial stuff, understand your industry, understand the movers and shakers and the things that matter to your C-suite, rather than another article on how to recruit more efficiently or how to optimize for time to hire, etc. So apologies for the pace of the talk. Again, this is one to many is difficult with generic stuff, but happy to take questions. Thank you all for hearing me out, and hopefully we can give you a coffee and have a chat later.